Hi there. In this video we're going to show you how to build a PC up from the bare components. You can see the case behind me and some of the components. This is going to be done by one of our students, James, so if I can just introduce James now.
Hi, I'm James, and today we're going to build a computer using these components here in front of us. The components we're going to need today is, of course, the case, the power supply which is already installed, a motherboard, CPU, RAM, a hard drive, a DVD burner, a SATA cable, a Molex to SATA power cable, and a Phillips head screwdriver. First we install the motherboard by first installing the I/O shield plate in the back of the case, but it's already been pre-installed, so then we lower the board in at an angle, line the ports on the back of the motherboard with the I/O shield plate, as such. And then what you're looking for is you're looking for the screw holes to line up with the mounting hardware on the actual case, and you can see that there. And then what you want to do is you want to put a screw in each hole. In real life, you would want to install a screw in every single hole you can see on the motherboard to give it optimal support. But for demonstration purposes, we're not actually going to be moving the case, so it's not necessary to do them all, just one to keep the board in place. Next, we install the CPU by first lifting the retention bracket on the CPU socket by pushing this metal pole down and then pulling to the side and lifting up. This releases the socket so that the pins in the CPU can go into the socket without any problem. Take your CPU out, and then to install the CPU, grab it by the corners and lift and never touch the pins because they're very fragile. To install the CPU, you'll see that there's a golden triangle on the corner of the chip. If you also look at the motherboard socket, there will also be a corresponding triangle on the socket because it can only go in one way. Line that up with the socket, and the insertion force for a CPU should be 0, which means when you put it on the socket, you should feel it just fall in to the socket and there should be no force needed. To secure the CPU in place, lower the lever down. You will feel some tension, but that's normal, and then push it till it clips back into its housing. The CPU is now installed. Next, for the CPU to be able to work, the CPU itself produces a large amount of heat, so in order to get that heat away, you need to install a heatsink and fan, which comes with the processor. To install this, you'd lower it down on top of the CPU first, put it into position, and then the mounting hardware on AMD, there's a clip at each side. So start off with the faraway clip and push it down so that it clips onto the mounting latch on the motherboard. Then do the same for the other side. Then that's it secured, but you need to actually apply tension to the CPU cooler, otherwise it won't make a good enough contact with the CPU. You do that by lifting this blue lever up and over, which again will feel firm, but it's supposed to be that way so it secures it to the motherboard correctly. That's you now installed your cooler. But for the fan to work, you need to plug it in, the fan in somewhere. What you're looking for is the fan header on the motherboard, which in this case is this 4-pin connector here. This 3-pin connector would be for another fan within the case, but is only optional. So you plug it in like so, and make sure your cable isn't constricting the fan in any way, and that's you installed the CPU and CPU cooler. Next, we're going to install RAM into the motherboard. First, to install RAM, there's 2 clips at each side of the DIMMs. Pull them outwards until they're fully released. We'll then install the RAM 1 stick at a time, and as you'll notice, there is a notch cut out within the RAM, and if you look at the socket on the motherboard, there's also a corresponding notch, which means the RAM can only go in one way. So for example, if I put it in this way, where the notch doesn't line up, the RAM won't go in. But if you turn it the other way, so that it corresponds with it, you'll then see once you're 100% sure that you've got the notch lined up, put equal tension at either side until the 2 clips pop up like that and you hear a click. That means it's installed correctly. Now do the same with the other DIMM. And that's you now installed the RAM. Next, we're going to install the hard drive, and to install the hard drive you need to install it in one of these 3.5-inch bays in the lower section of the case. So I'm just going to pick this one here and make sure your connectors are this side and at the bottom. Find the rails in the case and slide it in and line the screw holes in the hard drive up with the screw holes in the case. And then take the screw and just simply screw it in. There we go. Again, because the hard drive actually spins and can create vibration, you actually want to make sure you put every screw in that's possible, otherwise it can shake itself loose and cause data corruption. So for best security for the hard drive, just use all screws, and that's you installed the hard drive. Next, install the DVD-ROM drive. As such, you'll need to install it at the front of the case by first popping one of the front covers out of the case, just by simply putting your hand in the back and pushing on the cover, and it should give no effort at all to take out. Then, holding the drive like this, slide it in from the front of the case, making sure no cables is in the way. Line the bezel of the DVD-ROM drive up with the front of the case. And then again secure the drive in place with a couple of screws.